and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is past, present, and future as, as a vehicle to gain greater compassionate understanding for our circumstances and any given moment. But before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to settle in and get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing every cell, every organ, and bringing vital life energy throughout your being as you exhale. Exhale any stress, any tension, any negativity, any fatigue. And let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating every cell, every molecule, every electron, energizing, electrifying. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining fatigue, negativity, stress. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very softly rub your fingers against your palms. Feel the deliciousness of that sensation of your fingers tingling and your palms tingling, and bring yourselves present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome. So we're talking today about the using the lens of past and future to create perspective on the present. And in certain ways, the past and the future are constructs because what really exists is this moment. But we do live in time in many ways, and so let's look at how we can use time to support us in our evolution and our growth and our awareness and our compassion for ourselves and for others. So when we look at an isolated moment, perhaps it's a moment where we behave, we react in a way that isn't in alignment with how we would like to be expressing ourselves. So maybe we react, and we react in a way that just maybe generates an experience of regret or guilt or shame. When we gain a broader perspective, then that broader perspective can give us a greater capacity for compassionate understanding. So if someone, for instance, let's say we'll talk about a dog, because let's say a dog was kicked as a puppy, then it's very likely that when that dog sees feet or shoes, it may trigger a response or a reaction or memory of fear and threat when that dog sees feet or shoes. And then the dog would react accordingly, feeling threatened, whether the threat was imminent in this moment or not. Sorry, Maggie's standing on the camera here. Here she is. So if we think about fear is false evidence appearing real. And so in this example of the dog is reacting from the past and in an understandable way. Good morning, Tammy. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. The dog is reacting in an understandable way. And it's understandable in the context of recognizing the history of that dog. And so there's not the same degree of blame or even shame if the dog were to feel like guilt or shame. It was just a reaction that was based on a certain level of experience that may not be apparent in the moment. Good morning, Rosalind. Great to have you here. And hi, Irma. Welcome. Great to have you here. So this is a feather that had fallen out. Maggie seems to enjoy playing with her feathers that she's dropped. Hello, Isabel. Welcome. And Robert, welcome, welcome. It's great to have you guys all here. So we're talking about past, present, and future, and how the past and the future can inform the present. And welcome, Lebe from Ireland. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. So we're talking about past, present, and future, and really we're talking about this specifically in the context of the past and the future informing the present. And even if this notion of time is a construct, we can still employ it in a way that supports us. So oftentimes when we look at the past, there are things that we experience with shame or blame or guilt or anger or sorrow, and we can use this timeline idea to develop a greater sense of compassion and understanding for ourselves and for others. In fact, there's something in neurolinguistic programming called timeline therapy, where you actually can go to different places on a timeline and pick out instances. I think that we're typically predisposed to be looking for the negatives or remembering the negatives and using those situations to bludgeon ourselves. However, what I'm talking about here is deliberately looking into the past and the future as a tool. So I've spoken before about the Dickens process and how it's powerfully transformative. I'll just reiterate what it is here for a moment. So in the story, The Christmas Carol, Scrooge gets to go into the future and to see the consequences of his behavior if it were to continue in the pattern that it currently exists. And he sees the devastation of that and has a visceral awakening around that. And when he is brought back to the present from the ghost of the future, then he has a broader perspective on his life and makes some radical changes in the way that he interacts with himself, his life, and with others. So I did the Dickens process in 2017 around a vision that I had and what the consequence would be if I just continued on in my life the way that it was. And the idea is you look at how your life is in this moment and you project it in 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and to the end of your life, potentially, if you're even alive 20 years or 30 years from now, for instance, and to look at what the consequence is of the current perspective, the current way of being, what that influence is and what the consequences are if you carry that forward into your future. And the idea here is that you get to experience viscerally on a deep emotional level what the cost is not changing. And the reason that we can so powerfully, or the benefit of so powerfully resorting to deep emotional experience, is that we create incentive, the pain of continuing as things are. If you're unsatisfied with the way that things are, continuing out into the future, projecting that forward, enables the visceral agony, the emotional despair and devastation that is so powerful that ideally it overcomes the fear of change that so many of us are prey to. The fear of change, the fear of failure. Uh, and this is a way that we can use the future as a motivator to shift our present. We can also use the past in a way to gain greater compassion for ourselves in understanding the experiences that we've had that may be informing or or triggering certain reactivity that we have. And as we recognize that, uh, sometimes sheer recognition of the dynamic that created a certain situation, recognizing that and having compassion for it, may, in certain instances, release that trigger, release the power of that moment. And I want to talk about, I mentioned timeline therapy, but I want to talk about a couple things that are really, really powerful techniques for releasing um, or releasing trauma. So Rosalind says, Mira, I liked your Dickens episode a lot. I thought your delivery was better than Tony Robbins' version. Wow, that's saying a lot. Rosalind, thank you so much for that. That's where I learned it originally, was with Tony Robbins, and then I was introduced again to it, or reintroduced to it in another scenario. Thank you so much for that. That's a high compliment. Anyway, if you do a search probably on Enlightened World Network, I think you may be, I don't remember the title of that. I don't know if it had anything to do with Dickens. It may have. I think it might have been A Christmas Carol. I think that might have been the title, actually. But anyway, neurolinguistic programming is a super, super powerful technique for change and transformation. Isabel, it's on Enlightened World Network, and actually there's the Enlightened World Network YouTube channel, and you should be able to find it there, and you might be able to search by title, perhaps. If you look at, for the Core Connection um, playlist on Enlightened World Network's Facebook, YouTube channel, I think it should be there, and I believe it was right around Christmas. So Rosalind, oh, how awesome, Rosalind. She posted it to her Facebook page. That's awesome. I mean, if you guys would go and like it on the YouTube channel for Enlightened World Network, that would be awesome. And if you haven't already followed the Enlightened World Network YouTube channel, that would be awesome as well, because when you get to 1,000 followers, then it changes the dynamics and allows you to run certain advertising so it can generate revenue. Thank you so much for posting that link, Rosalind. I invite everybody to check it out, because the Dickens process, really, truly, if you allow yourself to immerse yourself emotionally in it, it's really, really powerful. So anyway, I was talking about a couple other really simple, powerful techniques for diffusing trauma. So A family member recently experienced an injury, and they were really freaked out by it because they kept replaying it in their head, seeing the visual of it. And so often when we experience trauma, there's a movie there's a movie that just plays over and over and over and over, and that movie just helps to reinforce the fear, the anxiety, the terror, whatever the experience entailed. And so here's a really, really simple and powerful technique that you can do yourself, or you can support others in doing. I asked this person, is the movie in color? And they said, oh yeah, lots of blood, because they cut themselves. And I said, okay, well, make it black and white. And immediately it shifted the experience, the intensity of that movie that was on an endless loop. And so there are very simple things that we can do to take the juice out of some of these experiences. So if you're playing a movie over and over and over, one of the things that you can do is make that movie black and white. Another thing that you can do is add a cartoon sort of soundtrack to it, something that makes it seem almost ridiculous. And that also can alleviate some of the intensity of that experience. Now, if it's a really horrible movie, what you can do is imagine yourself seated in the theater watching this movie on the big screen. But instead of you seeing the movie on the big screen, imagine yourself floating up out of your body, seeing yourself watching the movie. So you're not watching the movie, you're watching yourself watching the movie. And that dissociation allows you then to observe that person watching the movie. And what it does is there's a desensitization that occurs. And another thing that is also really powerful is to make that, I'm sorry about my voice, hold on one second, is to make that movie further away. So if you can make the image smaller, then it often has less impact. Because sometimes we're like really close up to the screen and it's really big and it's all encompassing. If we can push it away, make it further away, that can make a big difference. The other thing that you can do is be in the projection booth and be in the projection booth watching yourself watching the movie, and from the projection booth run that movie backwards, run that movie forwards. And Rosalind posted, there's a Tim Ferriss article. Tim Ferriss says Tony Robbins' 3-step exercise improved his life. Tony Robbins explains the Dickens pattern. Awesome. Awesome, Rosalind. Thank you so much. It's such a powerful technique. And any of these techniques, well, particularly the Dickens pattern, is way more effective if you allow yourself to really immerse yourself in the emotions of it. And the reason being that you want to gain leverage, what Tony Robbins calls leverage, to be able to, if we have a scale here, here's your fear of changing or your fear of failure, for instance, and here's your pain around not changing. And typically our pain around not changing is a whole lot less in weight than our fear around changing or our resistance. So if we make that if we can compel ourselves to that change with more and more intensity of emotion, then what happens is this change becomes the obvious choice, and it becomes a whole lot easier. So Irma says, how about if I can't see an image, just feel a feeling? Absolutely. So people process information in different ways. Some people are primarily visual, meaning they see pictures. Other people are primarily auditory, meaning they tell stories or they hear sounds or they make descriptions of things. Other people are primarily kinesthetic, meaning they sense things in their bodies and they have these visceral experiences. So those are the primary senses, but there's also gustatory. So people that taste things and digest. I talk about metabolizing and digesting different things, and you want to chew on that idea. Those are gustatory words. Other people are primarily olfactory, meaning they're getting the scent, catching the scent of something. So there are words that are connected with these different senses that are our primary vehicles for interpreting the world. So for instance, Maggie tastes everything. She's experiencing the world very much through her tongue and tasting things. So they're all valid 100%. And there are also synesthesias where there's a combination of the senses, for instance. So I tend to process information by conversation, and then my conversation can generate images rather than having the images be there initially. That's generally how I'm able to create a visual for myself, is I have a conversation about it. And I don't necessarily, on occasion, I see something in my mind's eye, but generally it's really more verbal for me. And then I can also generate feelings through those words in my mind. So there are all different ways that we process information. And the idea here is to gain leverage, right? You want the choice to change to be the obvious choice. And so we can also use the future, which is our imaginings of the future. We can also use the future to inform our present. That's what the Dickens process is. But we can also look at the future as sort of a garden of forking paths. Jorge, I think it's Jorge Luis Borges is an amazing author who wrote a book called Labyrinths. And I believe there was one story in there called The Garden of Forking Paths. And it was playing with this whole notion of time and timelines. And in any moment, if you could imagine that the present is this juncture point from which any number of futures can emerge. And some people would say does emerge, that time is constantly evolving and futures are constantly evolving and timelines are constantly breaking off into new paths and expressions. But we can look at these different futures and imagine these different futures projecting forward, which is, by the way, what we do when we worry is we're creating a projected future that we are believing to be true. or existing when in fact we're creating that future. So if we can recognize that this worrisome future is a fabrication, then we can allow ourselves to create alternative futures that perhaps are not so worrisome. And in fact, I have a friend where we were having a conversation where they were noticing about that they were creating this negative future, and therefore created three positive futures to overwhelm the hold that that potential negative future had. Again, we're talking about leverage, right? Leverage for change. So if for a negative, negatives tend to have a lot of power. What we get to do is to create multiple positives to sort of overwhelm that that the influence of that negative, and to neutralize it and then move into the positive. So we were talking about the past. Realize that the past is an interpretation. Once this present moment passes, there are a few features of that past that might be objective, but for the most part, our experience of the past, our memory of the past, is characterized by our interpretations and a whole bunch of layover of meaning that we ascribe to events. And when we recognize that we've ascribed that meaning, then that enables us to have a better access to neutralizing the negative impact of that event. So it also gives us an opportunity to recognize the emotional dynamics from that moment, potentially. And when we're looking at the past, again, we can utilize those techniques of making it black and white. When we make it black and white, it tends to minimize the emotional impact. When we make it further away, another thing that you can do if you have the scenarios that you're playing over and over in your head, another thing you can do is make it blurrier. You can, if you have a voice in your head that is telling you how terrible you are or how you're not enough, you can make that voice into a cartoon voice. You can make it really, really quiet, or you can make it sound like you can put it to music and make it into a goofy song. So there are lots of different things that you can do when you're hearing things or seeing things. When you're feeling things, you can allow yourself to play with the experience of the feeling to add to the intensity, for instance, to make the feeling more intense. And if you can make the feeling more intense, then you can recognize that you can make the feeling less intense. And you can maybe focus on the edges of the feeling and notice where it shifts or how it moves. You can notice what happens when you breathe into it. You can notice, you can find all different kinds of ways to shift it. And you can also put your attention on a different feeling, for instance. You could change the temperature, and that may shift the experience of the feeling as well. So there are all kinds of things that you can do to play with the experience, which then shifts your interpretation. So you're welcome, Isabel. And Irma says, a friend puts herself in pain and makes herself sick going into the past pain of a disease she contracted 2 years ago. Is this something she could break? 100%, Irma. So I love that you said it the way you said it. Puts herself in pain and makes herself sick, going into the past pain of a disease she contracted 2 years ago. Yes. So she's reliving it. She's recreating it again and again and again. And there are ways, certainly, like what we're talking about, are ways that she can mitigate that pain. And that sickness. What she's doing is revisiting the trauma, and so many people do this because it's such a deep imprint in their being, and so it's a matter of creating a new pattern. And part of it probably is that it may be, and this is a strange dynamic, but it's one that so many of us have fallen prey to, and that is that it's less painful to experience physical pain in so many ways than it is to experience emotional pain. And so sometimes we will feel that emotion, that physical pain, instead of allowing ourselves to process through the emotions. And it's a strange dynamic, but what I find is that with people that are experiencing a lot of physical pain, there's almost always, I'm hedging my bet here by saying almost, I really believe that there's always an emotional component, and that by relieving the emotional component, the physical component is going to release as well. So it's a matter of repatterning, and it may be, Irma, that the Dickens pattern could be an effective thing for your friend, perhaps. But for sure, this is a pattern that she's involved in, and it certainly can be shifted and moved into a different experience. So past, present, and future, really the only thing that exists is the present, in terms of our actual experience. I mean, there are certain objective things that happened in the past that we carry within us, but as far as the truth of the past, it only exists right here, right now, right? Because it's my recollection, or it's my understanding, or it's our collective understanding, but it exists in this moment. The past and the future exist in this moment. And we can utilize that knowledge to shift our experience of the past, to shift our expectation of the future, and our projection of it. And so these were some neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, techniques that are really effective. And it's really powerful knowledge, neurolinguistic programming, because it's very much about finding access to our inner workings and the way that we construct our inner world, which then shows up in our experience. And it's also about creating, how to create greater connection and rapport with others. It can, just like any kind of technology, it can be used for good or for ill, because it's really powerful and really does get to how we operate. But I invite you to check it out. Really interesting stuff. So Rosalind says, we're physical, emotional, and spiritual being. Is there a fourth one I'm missing? So the Dickens process works on the emotional level. I think that the Dickens process goes beyond the emotional level, because, and you might say we're intellectual beings as well, physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. I believe that emotion can be transcendent, And maybe, oh, this is a whole other conversation, Rosalind. I love it, actually. Maybe we get to talk about that tomorrow. Physical, talking about these different aspects of our being, and if they're separate or if they're not. I think that's a really cool conversation to have. Isabel says, "You're amazing explaining all these emotions and evolvings to evolution." Thank you so much, Isabel. I appreciate you too. I think I'm going to call it a morning. And I really love our time together. It's such a treat to be engaging with you and sharing and growing together, because these moments that we share are expansive for me. I can tell you that. And we get to evolve and awaken together. That's what it's all about. And so I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live every weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. I invite you to check out the wonderful community there. Engage, learn, grow, connect. And uh, until next time, enjoy and be here right now in the present.